My sister told my children's school that I'd abandoned them. She walked into the principal's office with her rehearsed story, claiming she was the one raising them now, that I was unfit and gone. She almost got custody on that lie alone. What saved me was a second-grade teacher who had saved every single lunchbox note I'd ever packed, every dated, "I love you," and stick figure drawing, filed away in a folder because she said they were too sweet to throw away. My name is Nicole. I'm a widow, a working mother, and for 3 months last year I fought to keep my children from the person trying to take them, my own sister. She told the courts I was unfit, that I'd left them behind, and the only proof I had to the contrary was tucked inside a second-grade classroom drawer. I need to take you back 3 years, to the moment everything was still whole. My husband, David, had been gone for just over a year. Brain aneurysm, sudden, no warning. He kissed me goodbye on a Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday night I was picking out a funeral urn with hands that didn't feel like my own. We had 2 children, Lily, who was 5 then, and Noah, barely 3. The survivor benefits from David's Social Security were supposed to be a safety net, a few $1,000s a month to keep the mortgage paid and the kids in their own beds. My sister Michelle knew that. She helped me file the paperwork. In the beginning, Michelle was my lifeline. She'd pick up Lily from kindergarten when I got held up at work. She'd bring over dinner on the nights I couldn't face the stove. She told the school she was the emergency contact, which made sense because I traveled sometimes for my sales territory. Nothing extreme, 3 days here, 2 days there, never more than a week. I left detailed itineraries, meal prep in the fridge, and a folder of medication instructions. Noah's asthma was bad that year. I trusted her completely. She was my sister. But something shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. The kids started calling her Mama Michelle. She'd laugh it off. "They're just confused," she'd say. Then the school began calling her instead of me, even when I was in town. The front office lady once told me, "Your sister said you were out of town again." I wasn't. I was at the grocery store. I brushed it aside. Grief messes with everyone, I told myself. She's just trying to help. It wasn't until Lily started 2nd grade that I realized Michelle was building a case. Lily's teacher was a woman named Dorothy, older, with 30 years in the classroom and a quiet way of noticing everything. Every morning before school, I'd slip a note into Lily's lunchbox. Handwritten, on a yellow sticky note or a torn piece of notebook paper. "Have a great day, love you, Mom," or "Good luck on your spelling test." They were small, hurried, often smeared with coffee. But I never missed a day, not even when I was on a work trip. I'd leave them pre-written, dated, and Michelle was supposed to pack them in. Then came the first real warning sign. I returned from a 3-day trip to Phoenix and walked into the school to pick up the kids early as a surprise. The principal, a man named Mr. Carey, looked startled to see me. "Your sister said you were gone for 2 more weeks," he said. 2 weeks. The trip was 3 days. He showed me a note on file, apparently from Michelle, stating that I was traveling for an extended period and she had temporary guardianship. I ripped that paper out of his hand and demanded to know who authorized it. Nobody could answer. And that was the last time anybody at the school saw me as a reliable parent. The following Monday, I was served papers in my own kitchen. Michelle had filed for emergency custody of my children. The petition claimed I had abandoned them, that I left for weeks at a time with no contact, that I was unfit. In the legal filing, she cited her role as primary caregiver and requested permanent guardianship to access the survivor benefits for the kids' needs. My hands went numb reading it. I called my lawyer from the floor. The first thing she said was, "Nicole, we need to prove you were present, consistently, during every single trip." And that was when I realized the only witnesses to my daily love were 2 children who had been coached to call someone else Mama, and a stack of lunchbox notes I never thought anyone else had seen. The morning after I was served, I drove to the school before the first bell. Not to confront anyone, not yet, but to find Dorothy. I needed to know if my kids were still in class, if they'd been pulled out, if Michelle had already taken them while I was sitting in my kitchen reading legal papers. Dorothy met me at the classroom door, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "They're here," she said. "Noah had a rough drop-off, but Lily is holding it together." She asked me to come inside. We sat at a tiny table surrounded by cubbies and construction paper. Dorothy asked me directly, "Nicole, is it true you've been gone for weeks at a time?" I told her everything. The 3-day trips, the itineraries I left, the call logs on my phone where I FaceTimed the kids every night from hotel rooms. I showed her the calendar on my phone, color-coded with pickup times and doctor's appointments. Then I asked her if anyone had come to her asking for records. She paused, then stood up, walked to her desk drawer, and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were every single lunchbox note I had ever written. Dozens of them in my handwriting on sticky notes and torn paper, each one dated. She told me that every day, Lily would open her lunch and read my note aloud to her table friends before eating. The kids loved it, she said. And when Lily was upset one day, she asked to keep the note. Dorothy started saving them because she saw how much it meant to her. She had no idea she was also building a timeline. She spread them across the table like evidence in a crime scene. Here was September 7th, a note saying good luck on your spelling test. September 10th, I love you more than pancakes. September 14th, remember Noah's inhaler check at noon. Every date corresponded to a day when I was allegedly missing, according to Michelle's petition. My hands shook as I read my own words, dates matching phone records and flight itineraries. This wasn't just sentiment. It was proof of presence, written in my own hand, delivered by my daughter's teacher. I called my lawyer from Dorothy's classroom. Her name was Catherine, a custody attorney I found through a widow support group. She had told me before that abandonment cases hinge on documentation. The burden of proof falls on the accuser, but once an accusation is made, the accused has to show they were there. Text messages help, but they're digital and easily faked. Handwritten notes, dated and corroborated by a neutral third party, those are gold. Catherine asked me 3 questions. How many notes? How many unique dates? And would the teacher testify? By the end of that call, Dorothy had already agreed to provide a sworn affidavit. Meanwhile, Michelle was escalating. She had convinced the school administration that I was unstable, that the travel was erratic, and that she was the constant. She filed an emergency ex parte hearing, which meant a judge could grant her temporary custody without me even being present. I had 48 hours to respond. I spent those 2 days gathering every scrap of proof I had. Boarding passes from work trips, hotel receipts with checkout dates that matched my notes, time-stamped photos of me with the kids at the park, at the dentist, at Lily's dance recital. The recital was particularly damning because Michelle's petition claimed I had missed it. But there I was in the photograph, front row, holding a bouquet of daisies that Lily handed me after her performance. The photo was dated, location stamped, and taken by another parent who later sent it to me. I forwarded it to Catherine with the subject line. She lied about the recital. The hearing took place on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, smelling of old paper and floor wax. Michelle sat at the petitioner's table with her attorney, a man I recognized from strip mall billboards. She looked poised, almost serene, like someone who believed her own story. I sat across the aisle with Catherine and a folder full of papers that I hoped would be enough. The judge entered, a woman named Judge Hendricks who didn't smile. She read the petition aloud: abandonment, extended absences, failure to provide care. Then she asked Michelle to describe the pattern. Michelle spoke about my work trips as if they were weeks-long disappearances. She mentioned nights when I wasn't there, phone calls I missed, a time when Noah had an asthma attack and she was the one who took him to urgent care. What she left out was that I was on a conference call with his pediatrician the same night from a hotel in Dallas. I had the records to prove it. She also left out that I had arranged for her to be the backup caregiver and that I flew home the next morning, cutting the trip short. But in her narrative, I was gone and negligent. Then Catherine stood up. She entered into evidence the folder of lunchbox notes, each one in a plastic sleeve with the date clearly visible. She entered the flight itineraries, the hotel receipts, and the photograph from the dance recital. Then she called Dorothy as a witness. Dorothy walked to the stand wearing a simple cardigan and reading glasses on a chain. She described how Lily received a note every single day, how she had saved them because they were the kind of thing a teacher notices, a child who is loved and knows it every day without fail. Judge Hendricks asked her, in your professional opinion, did these notes appear to be written by a parent who was absent and uninvolved? Dorothy didn't hesitate. No, Your Honor. These notes show consistent, daily engagement. They required forethought and intention. She was there, even when she wasn't physically present. That was the moment the case turned. Michelle's attorney tried to argue that notes could be pre-written in bulk, that they didn't prove physical presence. But then Catherine produced the final piece of evidence: a series of text messages between me and Michelle, time-stamped during my trips, where I asked specific questions about the kids' day that could only come from someone who had just spoken with them. In one, I reminded her that Noah had a field trip and needed his permission slip, which I had signed and left on the counter that morning. In another, I asked if Lily's loose tooth had fallen out yet. Those details, matched with the dates on the notes and the flight records, created a web of involvement that was impossible to fake. The judge recessed for 2 hours. When she returned, she dismissed the emergency petition entirely. The words clear and convincing evidence of ongoing parental involvement were read into the record. Michelle's face went pale, then hard. But the crisis wasn't over. Because after the hearing, as we walked out into the courthouse hallway, Michelle leaned close and whispered something that made my blood run cold. She said, "The school isn't the only place I have evidence. The kids told someone else what you did. Just wait." Then she walked away, and I had no idea who she was talking about or what narrative she had planted next. I stood frozen in that courthouse hallway as Michelle's heels clicked away, her words still ringing in my ears. "The kids told someone else what you did." I didn't know what that meant, but I knew one thing. She had already lost in court, and she was telling me the game wasn't over. I called Catherine immediately. She told me to go home, hug my children, and wait. If Michelle was implying another legal action, she'd have to file it, and we'd see it coming. But Catherine was wrong. Michelle wasn't planning to file anything. She had already done something far more insidious. 3 days later, a woman from Child Protective Services showed up at my door. Her name was Ms. Alvarez, and she had a clipboard and a calm, practiced expression. She said they'd received an anonymous report alleging that I was emotionally abusing my children, specifically that I was forcing them to lie about my presence in their lives, and that I was coaching them to hide the truth. The report claimed that Lily had confided to a trusted adult that her mother was making her say things that weren't true about the lunchbox notes. My stomach dropped. Michelle had weaponized my own evidence. She must have gotten to Lily. In the days before the hearing, Michelle had been alone with the children during my work trip, and she must have planted something. Lily, at 7, was bright and loyal, but she was also vulnerable to suggestion. I pictured Michelle sitting on the couch, asking Lily leading questions. "Does Mommy really write those notes? Or did she tell you to say that?" And Lily, confused, nodding because she wanted to please the adult in front of her. Now that manipulated confusion was in a CPS file, and I had to prove that my daughter's own words were the result of coaching, not truth. Ms. Alvarez conducted a home visit. She inspected the fridge, the bedrooms, the homework station I'd set up in the dining room. She interviewed both children separately with a child psychologist on speakerphone. I sat in the living room, unable to hear what they were saying, my entire body rigid with fear. When she emerged, her face was unreadable. She said the investigation would continue and that I would be contacted for a formal interview. I asked if my children were at risk of removal. She said the report was concerning enough to warrant a full assessment. That was not a no. That night, after the kids were asleep, I called Dorothy. I needed to know if anyone else had come to the school asking questions about me, about the notes, about my relationship with Lily. Dorothy's voice grew very quiet. She said that, about 2 weeks before the hearing, Michelle had scheduled a parent-teacher conference. Not for Lily, but for herself, as the primary caregiver. She told Dorothy she was worried about Lily's emotional state, that Lily had been saying confusing things at home about her mother. Dorothy asked her what kind of things, and Michelle said Lily kept insisting I wrote her notes every day, but Michelle knew that wasn't possible because I was never there. Dorothy told me she didn't buy it then, but she didn't report it either, because at the time she had no reason to believe it was part of a larger scheme. Now she realized Michelle was laying groundwork. I asked Dorothy one more question. Had Lily ever said anything to her that contradicted the notes? Dorothy was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "No. Lily has always talked about you with joy. She brags about your notes. The only person who ever suggested otherwise was Michelle." That statement, right there, became the center of my defense. But there was another layer. I found out through my lawyer that Michelle had also contacted the Social Security Administration. She had filed a request to become the representative payee for the survivor benefits, claiming that I was misusing the funds. The SSA had flagged the case for review, which meant the payments could be suspended while they investigated. If that happened, I'd lose the house. Michelle was attacking on multiple fronts: custody, CPS, and now the financial lifeline that kept food on the table. This wasn't just about the children anymore. This was about annihilating me. I sat at the kitchen table that night with a legal pad, writing out every interaction Michelle had with the kids, every pickup, every phone call, every time she came to the house. I cross-referenced it with my calendar and the folder of notes Dorothy had given me. A pattern emerged that I hadn't seen before. Every single time Michelle claimed I was absent, she had isolated the children during exactly those windows. She'd offer to watch them while I ran an errand, then tell the school I was gone. She'd pick them up from school early on days I was traveling, before they could open their lunchboxes and see my notes, and then she'd tell them I forgot to pack one. She was systematically erasing my presence, day by day, and replacing it with her own. The CPS interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I brought Catherine, the folder of notes, the flight records, and a sworn statement from Dorothy. I also brought something else, a recording from my home security camera, which I had installed after the court hearing just in case. On it, Michelle could be heard arriving to drop off the kids, and in the background, Lily's voice saying, "Mommy left a note in my folder today, see?" And Michelle's voice responding, "That's not from Mommy, sweetie." I put that there. It was a small moment, barely audible, but it proved that Michelle was actively trying to convince Lily that my notes were fake. Ms. Alvarez reviewed everything. She asked me directly if I had ever told my children to lie. I said, "I've never had to. The truth was in their lunchbox every day." She closed her folder and said she would be recommending an unfounded finding, meaning the case would be closed with no further action. But she also said that the report itself would remain on file, and that if another report came in, the pattern could be used against me. I asked who made the report. She couldn't tell me, but her expression said enough. After Ms. Alvarez left, Catherine told me something that shifted the entire case into a new light. She had been investigating the survivor benefits angle, and she found out that the amount Michelle would have received as representative payee was only the beginning. If she had gained permanent custody, she would also have been entitled to claim the children as dependents on her taxes, access a second set of trust funds that David's parents had set up for the kids, and petition the court for child support from me. The survivor benefits were the key that unlocked all of it. This was never about my fitness as a mother. This was a financial heist wrapped in a family betrayal. But I wasn't done, and neither was Dorothy. Because while the CPS investigation was closing, Dorothy had one more surprise. Something she hadn't even told me yet. Something that would finally end Michelle's campaign for good. The surprise was waiting in Dorothy's classroom on a Friday afternoon. She had asked me to stop by after school, and when I arrived, she handed me a sealed envelope with Lily's name written in crooked crayon letters on the front. Inside was a note Lily had written to me, months earlier, on a day I was supposedly absent. "Dear Mommy, I know you real notes. I salved this one for you. I love you." She had kept the lunchbox note I wrote, folded it into quarters, and tucked it into her own envelope with a drawing of the two of us holding hands. Lily had written it in class, and Dorothy had found it in her cubby while cleaning out folders the week before. She had no idea it existed during the hearing. But now, it proved something that no legal argument could. My daughter knew I was there. She never believed Michelle's story. She had been holding on to proof of my love the entire time. Dorothy placed a gentle hand on my arm and said, "I made a copy for your lawyer. The original is yours." I held that crayon note and wept, not from sadness, but from the sheer force of a 7-year-old's quiet, stubborn loyalty. Michelle had tried to erase me, but my daughter had saved me without even knowing it. That note became the final piece of evidence Catherine submitted to formally close the CPS investigation and to file a motion for sanctions against Michelle for making false statements. The judge in our original custody case reviewed the new evidence and issued a formal finding that Michelle's petition had been filed in bad faith. The SSA investigation was dropped within a week, and my survivor benefits were never interrupted. Michelle's request to become representative payee was denied with a note in the file flagging her for attempted fraud. She never faced criminal charges. I chose not to pursue that avenue. The cost to my children had already been high enough, and I needed the nightmare to end, not to extend it through a criminal trial that would keep her in our lives for years. But Michelle did face consequences. The school removed her from all emergency contact lists. The principal, Mr. Carey, called me personally to apologize for ever believing her narrative, and the school district implemented new verification protocols for guardianship claims because of what happened to us. Dorothy was recognized by the school board for her compassion and diligence, though she never wanted recognition. She told me later that she was just doing what any teacher would do, but I knew better. She was the kind of person who noticed a child reading a note aloud at lunch and thought, that matters enough to keep. The hardest part was explaining any of this to Lily and Noah. I didn't tell them the full story, they were too young. I simply said that Aunt Michelle had made some mistakes and wouldn't be coming around for a while. Lily asked once if it was her fault. I knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and said, "You did nothing wrong. You told the truth, and your truth saved us." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded and hugged me, and that was enough. A month later, I sat at our kitchen table with a fresh stack of sticky notes and a pen. Lily was starting 3rd grade, and Noah was beginning kindergarten. I wrote the first note of the new school year, a simple "I am so proud of you," and slid it into Lily's lunchbox. She found it at school, and that afternoon when I picked her up, she said, "Mommy, I read your note to my new teacher. She said it was sweet." I thought of Dorothy, of the folder she kept, of the crayon envelope, and I felt a wave of gratitude so profound it almost brought me to my knees again. The kitchen table is where our life rebuilt itself. Night after night, we sat together and did homework, ate dinner, and talked about our days. I stopped traveling for work entirely. I took a position with less pay and 0 overnight trips because no amount of money was worth what I almost lost. The house is still tight financially, and sometimes I lie awake worrying about the mortgage. But every morning, when I write those notes and pack those lunches, I remember that the smallest acts of love can become the largest evidence of a life. Michelle and I have not spoken since the hearing. I don't know where she is now, and I don't seek to find out. Some betrayals cut too deep to repair, and that's a truth I've learned to accept rather than fight. The children ask about her occasionally, and I answer honestly but gently. They remember her as the aunt who baked cookies, not the aunt who tried to take them. I want to preserve that memory for them, even if it's incomplete, even if it's kinder than she deserves, because protecting my children's hearts is still my most important job. And the notes keep coming. Every single day without fail. Some are corny jokes, some are reminders about spelling tests, some are just hearts and smiley faces. I don't know if Lily's new teacher saves them. I don't need her to, because I know now that the power of those notes doesn't depend on a courtroom. It depends on a child opening her lunchbox, seeing her mother's handwriting, and knowing, beyond any doubt, that she is loved and never abandoned. That is the proof I carry, and no one can take it away. I think about Dorothy often, not because she was a hero in the dramatic sense, but because she noticed something small and treated it like it mattered. Lunchbox notes, sticky notes, a child reading aloud at a lunch table. Most people would have smiled and moved on. Dorothy opened a folder and kept proof of a mother's love without ever being asked. She reminds me that the people who save us are rarely the ones making grand gestures. They're the ones paying attention. They're the teachers, the neighbors, the quiet observers who see what's real before the world tries to rewrite it. Michelle's betrayal cut deep, but it also revealed something I didn't know I had. A village I never asked for, a woman who guarded scraps of paper like legal documents, a daughter who kept my note in crayon because she refused to forget. In the end, my sister's entire case crumbled under the weight of a 7-year-old's loyalty and a teacher's ordinary kindness. If you're listening to this and you write the notes, pack the lunches, show up in ways nobody documents, please hear me. Those small acts are not invisible. They are evidence. They may be the very thing that protects you when the world turns hostile. And if you've ever been saved by someone who noticed what you were doing when you thought nobody was watching, tell me about them in the comments. I read every single one. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to know that love leaves a paper trail. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this, and check the description for ways to support the channel. Thank you for listening. Good night.